Let's review the uses of italics. And in the past, sometimes people used underlining for the same purpose, but now italics is much more common. If you are using handwriting, so let's say you're writing an exam, then perhaps underlining would be better because it's a little clearer when you're dealing with a handwritten font. But if we're using italics, which is the standard, then we use it in a number of places. And first of all, we use it in titles. Okay, so if we have titles of creative or academic works. And the key is that if you're dealing with a work that's longer, that has more weight to it or is more significant, then you tend to use italics. Whereas if the work is shorter, then you use quotation marks. And I'll just give a couple of examples here. So if you have, let's say, the title of an essay, fairly short, you use quotation marks. And if you're dealing with a magazine, which is longer, then you use italics. And often you'll find that the shorter work can be included in a longer work. So some other examples of places where you would use quotation marks instead would be things like a short story, let's say, a short story, or a song, right? Whereas if these were found, let's say, on a CD or in a book, these are longer works and you would use italics. Same kind of thing for, let's say, a website. So a website would be in italics, the title of it, whereas a web page or a post would be in quotation marks. And I think you can see the point, and I won't go through all the examples here, but when it comes to titles, you just need to determine, is this a significant work? Does it have a lot of length to it? And then it needs to be in italics. If not, then we can use quotation marks. So let's say you take a musical composition, an opera, that's a significant work. You use italics. A shorter song, use quotation marks. One thing to note is that this rule about titles really only applies to titles of creative and academic works. So if you're dealing with other what are called proper nouns, you really don't need italics. An example would be something like Mount Everest or the Eiffel Tower. Right? Those are titles of things, but they're just regular proper nouns. They're not titles of academic or creative works. One specific finicky rule to look at here, and this is with newspaper titles. So newspaper titles. And if your newspaper title includes the word the, so the Baltimore Sun, you can actually take it out of italics. You don't have to include it. Notice also that if the newspaper title does not include the name, even though the location name is often associated with the title, then don't italicize it. So in this case, London is not part of the Times title, but Baltimore here is, and that's the distinction between the two. Okay, the next few rules here concern sacred texts. So if we think about sacred texts, and we're speaking particularly of the Bible and the Quran, then we typically don't italicize the titles of those works. So Bible is not italicized, and the same thing with the Bible book here, 1 Corinthians 13. Often you'll find this abbreviated, by the way, okay, or shorten a bit. But if you see this, then don't use italics. At the same time, if you're using a particular version of the Bible, let's say, so the King James Version, then a version is italicized. The next rule concerns what we sometimes refer to as words as words. Words as words, which is a weird kind of description. But what we mean by that is this notion that you're drawing attention to a particular word. So in this case, we've drawn attention to the word charity and also the word love. And when we draw attention to a particular word like that, we use italics. You can also use quotation marks. You'll see this sometimes. I would prefer italics, but it's somewhat up to you. And the main thing is really just to be consistent in your approach. Notice that you can also draw attention to specific letters or numbers, as we've done here. So the same rule applies. But be careful, and you'll see here that just the letter itself is in italics, whereas the rest of this, the apostrophe and the S, these parts are not. So that's just a tiny little formatting thing, but just be careful with that. Okay, the next rule here concerns the titles of what we might call vehicles. And this includes a number of things. So it includes things like trains, planes, automobiles, ships, spacecraft. So anything like that that moves, when it has a name attached to it, we tend to italicize it. So here we're dealing with a barge, which has a name like that, and we italicize it, the floating frog. You can also use italics for emphasis, and this is usually not kosher in academic writing. So in popular writing, you can sometimes use emphasis, but even an editor who deals with creative writing, with fiction, will tell you that you should really let the words speak for themselves. Okay, so try to minimize the use of italics for emphasis. Then we have words that are foreign words, but we're using them without a translation. Okay, so we have a foreign word. And when you're using foreign words, then you want to make sure that you put them in italics, unless the words have become common enough in our language that you don't need to do so. And it's remarkable how many words in the English language are imported from other languages. So this is often a very tricky thing. But in this case, if you write, our stay with our Dutch hosts was very gezellig, that's a Dutch word that means kind of cozy or convivial. Most people might not be aware of what that means, unless you're part of a Dutch community, I suppose. And then in that case, if people are not aware of it, make sure you use italics. If you look at the last sentence here, he claims he is an autodidact polymath. Autodidact means you've taught yourself, and polymath means that you know a lot of different things. Poly means many. Both of these words come from Greek. Okay, both of these have Greek roots. But we have not actually put them in italics because they are quite old borrowings in English. So the key then with foreign words is really to determine, are these standardized? Are they common in English? Or are they still quite foreign? And that can be difficult. It can depend on your audience, but it can also depend on usage. And in some cases, you may just want to check a dictionary and see if that word is quite common or not. So those are the rules for italics, and hopefully this helps you with making sure that your writing is properly formatted.